Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live event with Chris McKinnell. I'm Mark Robson. I am just very much going to be in the background tonight, hopefully making sure everything ticks over. And I'll just hand straight over to Chris now. If you do have questions throughout that you want to put to Chris, if you put it in the comments box, and we'll pick up as many as we can at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Chris.
Welcome, everyone. I am genuinely glad you're here tonight. And before we get started, I'd like to thank Mark Robson, without whom we wouldn't be meeting here tonight. His technical expertise made all of this possible. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris McKinnell, and I am the grandson of Ed and Lorraine Warren. I grew up with the cases that became the Conjuring universe, and I've spent my life investigating anomalous phenomena on every continent on Earth. My grandmother and I founded the Warren Legacy Foundation in 2013 to expand our reach around the world after the first Conjuring movie came out. The dedicated volunteers who help families in trouble are my greatest source of pride. They are amazing people. But tonight is not about my grandparents' famous cases, and it's not a ghost story collection. It's about what all of those cases, theirs and mine, actually revealed. And what they revealed may surprise you. Let me start with something personal. It was a dark, rainy night, and I was 16 years old, driving home from my first party, when I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw an old man sitting in the back seat. I spun around. I was terrified. And the seat was empty. I told myself it was probably just the rain or the darkness, the late hour, but I turned on that overhead light and I got home as fast as I could. I didn't say anything to anybody, though. The next day at work, I was working at the Canton Bake Shop, and I kept catching a glimpse of that same old man out of the corner of my eye. Every time I turned to look directly, there was no one there. This happened repeatedly throughout the day. By the end of my shift, I was unsettled enough that I couldn't explain it away anymore, even to myself. About a week later, I finally told my mother what had been happening. She didn't say a word at first. She just went over to the cupboard, pulled out the family photo album. She got out a photo and said, "Is this the man you saw?" And of course it was. She told me she'd been praying to him that night, asking him to watch over me. He was my great-grandfather. He was Lorraine Warren's father, James Moran. He'd loved me when I was small, and he died when I was 4 years old. I don't have any memory of him at all. I've spent a long time looking for a satisfactory materialist explanation for what happened across those 2 days. I never found one. What I found instead, across decades of field investigations all over the world, was that this kind of experience is not rare. It's not pathological, and it's not the province of the credulous or the frightened. It's one of the most common human experiences there is, and almost universally suppressed in the modern Western world because we have no accepted framework for explaining it. Tonight, I want to give you one. Before I do, I want to say something that may surprise you. I'm not here to ask you to believe anything. I'm not here to ask you to suspend your beliefs, but I do want you to come here with an open mind. I'm here to ask whether the framework we inherited is adequate to explain the evidence we actually have. A skeptic follows the data. A dogmatist protects the framework. I've tried to be the former my entire career. On some occasions, I have failed. And then people paid a price for that. I'll come back to that, though. I want to tell you briefly how I actually work in the field, because it separates what I do from what you may have seen on television. When I work with a sensitive investigator, somebody who's a psychic, they go into a location completely cold. No case notes, no prior information whatsoever, no background, and no communication with the team. Their observations are recorded and sealed before any verification occurs. We don't want information bias, research bias. And I don't allow two sensitives to work the same case together. Under that protocol, specific verifiable information has been provided before any knowledge of the location's history was available. Bodies disposed of in a cellar in Bogota, in a haunted bordello that I investigated with an archbishop there. It was confirmed by a government liaison who was with us. Two separate deaths at two specific locations on a property outside of Lima were identified before the research team shared anything. That's not some kind of performance for the camera. It's methodology. And it's what I'm calling for at a much larger scale. The labels that we inherited, demon, ghost, jinn, haunting, or possession, they don't just explain anything. They name things and make us afraid of them. Once we name something, we stop looking at it clearly. The label becomes a lens that shapes what we see, and eventually shapes how the phenomena actually manifests. I've watched this happen across thousands of cases. When a family believes the phenomena in their home is demonic, it behaves demonically. The label doesn't merely describe the experience, it participates in shaping it. The framework people bring to an anomalous experience shapes the specific form that the experience takes. This is one of the most significant observations in my entire body of work. Your cultural and spiritual beliefs shape the manifestation. For example, a man from a lineage of psychically gifted women came to me a couple of months ago. He'd grown up in a haunted house. He knew he was sensitive, and he had spent his life terrified by the paranormal. He was experiencing serious marital difficulties, and phenomena was occurring in the home with an 8-month-old girl and a 2.5-month-old girl. His wife independently witnessed a clock fly across the living room and a stack of plates fly across the kitchen. That was when they were having some difficulties. When I worked with him to address the relationship issues and shift the emotional environment of the home, raising the positive energy by shifting fear to understanding and helping them to in their relationship, the activity stopped within days. There's been no reoccurrences. As a matter of fact, he sent me a photo of his little 2-year-old in the bath with this big smile on her face. He said she had been afraid to take a bath for months, and now she was excited and she was ready to go into her own bedroom and go to sleep for the first time in a very long time. What had been labeled as haunting was the concentrated anxiety of a sensitive man whose inner life was in turmoil, was in crisis, finding its way into physical expression. The label would have made it worse if we'd called it demon or poltergeist. But the understanding resolved it. The full account of what happened in that home and what it reveals about consciousness interacting with physical reality is in the book. A second family in New England, as a matter of fact, had a similar dynamic, and that was also about 2 or 3 months ago. A mother and son were dealing with mental and physical issues. They were shut-ins. He was homeschooled. And their underlying emotional and relational tensions were manifesting as physical phenomena. I used the same approach. I helped them understand what was actually happening, addressed the root causes, and gave them the tools to take control of their own environment. And there was a complete turnaround with no more phenomena whatsoever. These are not ghost stories. These are stories about human consciousness and what it's capable of when fear is replaced by understanding. It also shows the power of fear. That's what this entire evening is about. And this is the part of the conversation that almost nobody in this field is willing to have. So I'm going to have it. I didn't always work the way I just described. For the first 10 years of my career, I approached these cases through an inherited framework, one that named things as demonic. That framework told families that, yes, something evil had attached itself to their home, to their child, and to their lives. I've asked myself many times, looking back on those old cases, whether people would have been less frightened and resolved things more cleanly if I'd been able to ask better questions from the start. I believe the answer is yes. Confirming people's worst fears may have contributed to the very manifestations we were trying to address. The framework we bring to anomalous experiences shapes the specific form that experience takes. When investigators showed up with a demonic framework and confirmed it, we may have made things much worse. It's one of the words, labels, if you will, that we will never use in the Warren Legacy Foundation. I'm not saying, by the way, that the phenomena were not real. I'm saying that the issue may have been that we were labeling things wrong, and that a wrong label in this territory is not a minor inconvenience. It's a source of genuine harm. That is actually one of the biggest regrets I have when I think about my first case when I was 16 years old. I've never experienced a night with more overwhelming manifestations of phenomena. Everyone except my grandfather was terrified that night. I was certainly no exception. I had been afraid of the dark my whole life. You would have been too if you'd grown up with Ed and Lorraine Warren. The whole house reverberated with the sound of massive fists pounding the walls in repetitions of 3. Something my grandfather told me was a sure sign it was demonic. There were growling and clawing sounds coming from the walls. There were 2 hulking black shapes that came down the stairs at 3 o'clock in the morning. The woman was clawed, 3 claw marks down her left cheek while we watched. And then a pot with Holy Church incense in it flew out of the kitchen, around the corner, and straight at my head, narrowly missing me. She wanted out of that house, and I ran to the front door to help her. The lights were going on and off around me. The door wouldn't open, and then the recliner I'd just been sitting in tumbled across the room at us. We finally were able to get out. But looking back, I have no idea what I was actually dealing with back then. I wish I could go back and look at it with the knowledge that I have today to try to understand the underlying issues that made those manifestations so incredibly powerful. But that recognition is what changed how I work. And it's what tonight is really about. Not about fear, but about a better framework. For example, electricity can kill you. A downed power line, a faulty appliance, a lightning strike. All of these are real dangers. But that does not mean that electricity is evil, right? Or that we should refuse to investigate it, or that anyone who encountered it was cursed. We learned to understand it. And once we understood it, it lit up the world. The paranormal is not defined by the danger. It's defined by what it reveals. Now, let me share something with you that I find absolutely extraordinary. The Kogi people, an indigenous Amazonian tribe living in the mountainous jungles of Colombia. They speak of Aluna, the thought world that precedes and generates physical reality. They've maintained this understanding for thousands of years in isolation. And the animist communities in Mali, where I served in the Peace Corps for 2 years, understood everything in nature as carrying power and sentience. Consciousness is not something that happens inside people. It's the medium in which everything exists. Rumi, a Sufi poet in Persia, writing 1,000 years ago, he described the self as a drop that is also the ocean. The individual is not separate from the whole. The sense of separation is the condition of perception, not the nature of reality. Now, the Buddhist concept of emptiness, properly understood, is not nihilism. It's the recognition that individual selfhood is a localization of something that has no inherent boundary. The Aboriginal Australians have maintained an unbroken living tradition for 65,000 years. Archaeological work published in Nature Human Behavior back in 2024 documented a ceremonial practice in Clogg's Cave dated to approximately 12,000 years ago that matched ethnographic accounts of the same practice in precise detail until the mid-1800s. That's 500 generations of continuous cultural transmission. Practices that produce no meaningful effect tend to be abandoned. Why on earth would the people practice this same ritual for that long if there were not tangible outcomes? None of these traditions talked to each other. None of them had access to quantum field equations or peer-reviewed journals. All of them arrived at the same place. Now, here's what I actually find most remarkable. In November 2025, Professor Maria Strom of Uppsala University published a peer-reviewed paper in AIP Advances. It was titled Universal Consciousness as Foundational Field. Professor Strom is a nanotechnologist, one of the most distinguished scientists in Scandinavia. The paper was selected as the best paper of its issue and featured on the journal's cover. Working from quantum field theory and advanced mathematics, she proposes that consciousness is not a byproduct of brain activity. It's the foundational field from which matter, space, time, and life itself emerge. And that individual consciousness does not end at death, but returns to the universal field from which it arose. Think about what that really means. Excuse me. She arrived there through equations. The Kogi arrived there through generations of living inside the evidence. And I arrived there through field investigations. We were not talking to each other. Well, not back then. But we were describing the same mountain, the same destination. I want to share my own hypothesis here, which I call temporal overlap. It is speculative, and I want to be honest about that from the start. I'm not presenting this as proven. I am presenting it as the most parsimonious explanation for what I've documented across my entire life, and as a framework that deserves serious research. You may have heard of the stone tape theory, which is pretty popular in paranormal circles. It was proposed that anomalous phenomena are recordings imprinted in the physical materials of a location and played back under certain conditions. I want to tell you where that idea actually came from because it matters. It was invented by a writer named Roger Neal. Nigel Neal or Neely. I've never been able to figure that one out. But it was for a BBC television drama in 1972. It was a dramatic device. That's all. It was never scientific explanation or theory at all. It doesn't explain why phenomena are perceptible to some people and not to others. Why some phenomena respond to observers while others do not, or why activity diminishes over time. It's a story that got mistaken for an explanation. What I'm proposing, on the other hand, is different, and it has two components. The first is environmental embedding. Events of extreme emotional intensity, particularly life and death situations, mortal crisis, they may produce changes in the local field of a location that persist independently of any living observer. In other words, they may leave an impression in time and space. Not a recording, more like, again, an impression left in matter by concentrated energy. The second component to this, though, is it also requires sensitive activation. That embedded impression requires interaction with a sufficiently sensitive individual, human consciousness, to become perceptible. The phenomena may exist independently, but it requires the right receiver to become manifest. In the same way that a radio signal exists independently of a receiver, but requires a functioning receiver to become audible. I want to be direct about the limits of this hypothesis. No physical mechanism for the embedding process has been identified. Current physics does not support the claim that human electromagnetic output could create the kind of field distortion that would be required for something like this. Your heart does not produce that much more energy during crisis, but it does produce much more than you do at rest. There are genuine gaps, though, and I'm not asking you to look past them. I'm asking whether the observations that generated this hypothesis warrant the serious investigation that has not yet been conducted. I also want to address any skeptics who might be listening to this because intellectual honesty requires it. The materialist model of consciousness accounts for the overwhelming majority of what we observe about brain function, about cognition and behavior. That's not in dispute and should not be minimized. But there are anomalies at the edges of this framework. And the history of science tells us something specific about anomalies. The geocentric model of the universe worked perfectly well for centuries, but the planets kept moving in ways that could not be accounted for. It was later replaced by the heliocentric model, which was also useful for a time, but itself was incomplete. Those anomalies were not minor inconsistencies. They were the signal the framework was approaching its limits. The appropriate scientific response to anomalies is not dismissal, it's intensified investigation. One of the things I find frustrating is when scientists become dogmatic, when they refuse to look at evidence for one reason or another. Maybe they're afraid that they will be ridiculed and their careers can be in danger. But for us to advance, we have to be willing to open our minds and look beyond our current understanding. Several studies, actually, and cases point to these anomalies, and I'd like to discuss them briefly now. Professor Pim van Lommel, he's a cardiologist in the Netherlands. He conducted a prospective study of near-death experiences. It was published in The Lancet in 2001. And anyone who had a cardiac arrest during the study period was enrolled. Brain states were documented, experiences recorded afterward. He documented verified accurate perceptions during confirmed flat EEG, no measurable brain activity. And The Lancet is one of the most rigorous peer-reviewed medical journals in the entire world. It's not a fringe publication. It's a kind of anomaly that historically signals a framework reaching its boundary conditions. Oh, and in the Pam Reynolds case, she was going in for surgery and her body temperature was lowered to clinical death. There was no measurable brain activity. Her eyes were taped shut. Her ears were plugged. And under these conditions, she accurately described specific surgical instruments that were not yet introduced when she went under. So she didn't know about the bone saw that was hidden underneath a cover, which is standard practice for these. And she also knew about surgical team interactions, conversations they were having, and procedural details that she had no physical means of perceiving. I find actually this next area of research particularly relevant. Dr. Daryl Treffert, he's a clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin, and he documented sudden savants across 50 years of research. These are neurotypical individuals with no prior training who developed fully formed abilities that appear without apparent causes. There was a man in Israel who walked past a piano. He was 28 years old. And all of a sudden he sits down and he could play at a virtuoso level without any training whatsoever. Another man, a journalist, found one day that he was capable of perfect idiomatic German, even though he had been struggling for 2 years to understand the language at all. The capacity pre-existed its expression. The neurological change did not create the ability. It created the conditions for access. You may remember Mary Steenburgen. She's an Academy Award-winning actress. She was in Back to the Future 3. She had routine arm surgery back in 2007. Nothing to do with her brain other than the anesthetic. And when she woke up, there was music playing constantly in her mind, hundreds of songs. She went on to write music professionally for something called the Universal Music Publishing Group. And she even won a Critics' Choice Award. And she had never been particularly musically inclined before. AM radio, FM radio, shortwave radio, they don't create different signals. They access different parts of a spectrum that existed before any receiver was ever built. When the receiver changes, what becomes accessible changes. The spectrum does not change at all. I believe the brain tunes consciousness. When the architecture changes, what becomes accessible changes. The awareness does not. This is also true, by the way, with traumatic brain injury, where the tuner is damaged. Just as a broken piano may not play the same music it did when it was new, the music itself still exists. I want to talk about psychic sensitivity because I think it's one of the most misunderstood capacities in human experience. We know from peer-reviewed research that human neurons respond to changes in the Earth's magnetic field, below the threshold, though, of conscious awareness. This was demonstrated by Kirschvink of Caltech in controlled experiments. Your brain is already processing electromagnetic information without telling you. Most people simply have no framework for what to do with that. Here is where it gets interesting, though. High electromagnetic field exposure from faulty wiring, from electrical equipment, from sleeping with your headboard against a wall that has active wiring running through it, that can produce a very specific cluster of experiences. The sensation of being watched, a feeling of a presence in the room, haunted, unease, dread, even auditory and visual hallucinations and vivid nightmares. These are documented effects of high EMF exposure. It's not folklore. If you or someone you know is experiencing what feels like a haunting, the first thing I would suggest is get an inexpensive EMF reader and maybe move the bed across the room. Talk to an electrician. Moving your bed away from the wall costs nothing, and it resolves more cases than I can count. But why does EMF produce these specific experiences? Why does it feel like a presence rather than simply feeling unwell? My hypothesis is that this is a vestigial capacity, something we evolved with and have largely lost conscious access to. For most of human history, detecting subtle variations in the electromagnetic environment may have been a genuine survival advantage. We still have the neurological equipment. We've simply lost the cultural permission and the practice to use it consciously. When high EMF floods that system involuntarily, the brain receives information it has no framework to interpret. It reaches for the nearest available explanation. And in the West, that explanation is haunting. A psychic, in my understanding, is someone who has developed the neurological architecture to interpret that information consciously and with some degree of precision, not through supernatural means, through neuroplasticity. That's the brain rewiring itself through sustained, deliberate practice to attain signals that most people filter out entirely. The tools psychics use, whether they be tarot cards, divining rods, scrying mirrors, automatic writing, what have you, pendulums, they are not the mechanism that creates the reading or the information. They're just focusing devices. They quiet the conscious mind and create the conditions for a subtler signal to surface. Same thing with consciousness altering techniques, breathing techniques, meditation, etc. The mechanism is the trained awareness behind them. Two practitioners using completely different tools can arrive at the same information because the tools are not what matters. The quality of attention is what matters. Michael Persinger, he's at Laurentian University, he designed what became known as the God helmet. It's a device that applied weak electromagnetic fields to the temporal lobes, and subjects reliably reported the sensation of a presence in the room, feelings of profound significance, and in some cases, what they described as religious or mystical experiences. The replication record for this research has been inconsistent, though, which is worth noting. But the underlying observation that targeted electromagnetic stimulation of the temporal lobe produces experiences indistinguishable from what people call paranormal, that finding has not gone away. This connects directly to what I said earlier about the brain as a tuner. The savant who walks past a piano and can suddenly play at virtuoso level, he didn't acquire a new capacity. He accessed one that was already there. I believe the same is true of psychic sensitivity. It's not a gift handed to a chosen few. It's a capacity distributed across the human species at varying levels of natural aptitude, exactly like musical ability or athletic ability or any other human capacity. Almost anybody, for instance, can learn to dribble a basketball. Very few can play in the NBA. But the difference between someone who has touched a ball and someone who's practiced for 10,000 hours is not supernatural. It's neurological. It's real. And it's available to more people than our culture has ever given permission to develop. If consciousness is primary, if the brain tunes rather than generates it, if every tradition that ever looked carefully at this arrived at the same recognition, then what we call paranormal experience is not evidence of powerlessness. It is consciousness expressing itself beyond expected boundaries. The people who are frightened by their own sensitivity are frightened because nobody gave them a framework that works. That's not a personal failing. It's an information problem. Here in South America, anybody who is sensitive is labeled a witch. It's just, they don't understand. I run an online psychic support group, and there are approximately 950 members worldwide. People who came to me frightened or isolated, often convinced something was wrong with them, just as others had come to my grandmother many years ago. What changed for most of them was not the experience stopping. It was understanding what the experiences were actually pointing toward. Fear became interest. Isolation became connection. What felt like a curse began to feel like capacity or even a gift. There's a reason so many of the people who find their way to that group feel alone with their experiences. And it's not because the experiences are rare. It's because the culture they live in gave them no permission to have them. Research conducted at, and I'm not going to try to say this in German, it's the IGPP. It's a renowned institute in Freiburg, Germany. They compared how people in different cultural contexts report anomalous experiences. What they found was striking. In cultures with open, normalized frameworks for these experiences, report rates are higher and distress is lower, and integration of the experience into a person's sense of self is healthier. The experience itself is not different. The permission to hold it is. And the gender question is equally revealing. In the West, for instance, women report anomalous experiences at considerably higher rates than men. Matter of fact, most of the people who follow me online are women because they're more open to the paranormal. But cross-cultural research doesn't support the idea that this is a biological difference. In cultures where these experiences are normalized across gender, the reporting gap largely disappears. What the Western gender gap is measuring is not necessarily who has these experiences, it's who feels safe manifesting them and saying so. This has profound implications, actually, that extend well beyond the paranormal. The labels we apply to children who report these experiences, overactive imagination, anxiety, and attention seeking, even psychosis, do not make the experiences go away. They make the children feel ashamed of something that may be a genuine capacity, a gift, an ability. We're not protecting them. We're suppressing them and handing them shame as a replacement. And having said that, I want to make it clear too, that if the parent is afraid, we're going to make the child afraid. We need to come at this a different way. There are some theories that really affected me when I was in college. Labeling theory, self-fulfilling prophecy, cultural permission structures. They're not exotic concepts. They operate in every classroom, every family, every culture on earth. What we tell people they're capable of perceiving shapes what they allow themselves to perceive. And when we refuse to give them a framework for their experiences, it doesn't disappear. It goes underground, where it does considerably more damage than it would have done in the open. The framework I'm offering tonight is not a paranormal framework. It's a human one. And the people who need it most are often the youngest and the most recently told that what they are experiencing is not real. I don't charge for the work that we do. And anyone who does should not be trusted. I've seen too many people taken advantage of by those who have a vested interest in maintaining their fear and suffering. The knowledge that I've accrued was given to me over several decades by every tradition generous enough to let me sit with them and learn. Passing it on is not charity. It's the only appropriate response. It's the only way to ensure that the knowledge is not lost for another generation to have to rediscover by itself, on its own. My academic working paper and my public thesis are both available free of charge at chrismckinnell.com. If tonight raised questions you want to explore further before you decide whether my book is for you, start there, please. I want to read something from the Warren Legacy. This is from the opening of chapter 1. It was the first week of August, 1981. A typically sweltering and humid day in New Hartford, Connecticut, when my grandfather Ed Warren called me with an unexpected and unwelcome request. Chris, there's a poltergeist terrorizing a family in Lee, Massachusetts, and I want you to join me tonight. I want to make something clear right up front. I was 16 years old and about to enter my last year of high school. Growing up with Ed and Lorraine Warren, world-famous ghost hunters, had left me terrified of the dark. I'd spent my childhood shuffling between social workers and psychologists because of my extreme fear of what I sensed in the darkness. The idea of going into a haunted house where a family was being physically and spiritually abused was not something I had ever considered. Unfortunately, my grandfather had other ideas. Sure, Gramps, I replied automatically, but why do you want to take me? Your grandmother can't join me this evening. I'm going to need your help. I've only gone on lecture tours with you. I don't really know anything about this. How on earth can I help? My grandfather chuckled. It's time for you to start learning. That's where the book begins. What follows that phone call changed everything. If you want to know what happened in Lee, Massachusetts that night, and what it set in motion across the next 4 decades, The Warren Legacy is available now, and the link is in the chat. Before I close, I want to tell you about something that is a part of the special edition of the book, because it's unlike anything else available anywhere. About a year ago, a woman named Sandy, she's an old friend of my grandmother's, she contacted me wanting to return something she had been keeping for 25 years. It was the last audio recording Ed Warren ever made. Not an interview, not a lecture, something practical. There's music to settle you, spiritual music, his voice to guide you, his prayers to strengthen you, something a person could use in their own home if they were frightened and didn't know where to turn. He made only one copy. He believed it would help people. Then it disappeared for 25 years. My grandmother had sent it to Sandy to help her when she was in trouble, not knowing it was the only copy. The night before Sandy sent me the package, her adult son, a man in his mid-40s, he got up in the middle of the night and he was walking to the bathroom in his underwear, and he looked to the bottom of the stairs where he saw an elderly woman with a bun in her hair holding a chicken. He was, of course, embarrassed because who is this woman and I'm in my underwear? The woman turned, looked at him, smiled, and disappeared. He had no idea who she was. He'd heard of Lorraine Warren from the Conjuring movies, but he didn't know the real woman. He had no idea who she was at home or that she actually had chickens living in the house with her. Believe me, I told my grandmother, if I were to go first, I was coming back as one of her pets, because that would be as close to heaven as you can get on earth. But my grandmother, she came back to make sure that that recording reached me in time for the book. The special edition of the Warren Legacy includes that recording, a separate practical booklet on how to put the lessons in the book to work in your own life, and audio guidance from me on how to identify a haunting, how to deal with that haunting, how to protect and ground yourself, and how to spiritually cleanse your home. It's available exclusively at chrismckinnell.com for $49.95. And it includes also the paperback and the ebook. If you've already read the book, I'd appreciate it very much for you to leave an honest review on both the ebook and paperback listing on Amazon. It really helps the algorithm to share the book with others who may need it, and it would be a huge help to me as well. Let me come back to that night. I looked in my rearview mirror on that dark and stormy night when I was 16. My great-grandfather did not come to frighten me, although I admit that he certainly did in the moment. He came because my mother asked him to watch over me. She'd been praying to him, and somehow, across whatever boundary some assume is final, he heard her. That's not a horror story. That's love operating beyond death. That's what this book is about. That's what tonight was about. The phenomena I've documented across a lifetime of investigations are not outside nature. They're misunderstood and poorly explored. But that distinction is the foundation of every scientific advance that's ever expanded our understanding of what nature actually is. A nanotechnology professor at Uppsala University and the Kogi people of Colombia are describing the same mountain. I've spent my life walking toward it from a different direction. The Warren Legacy is what I found doing just that. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. I'm happy to take your questions. Mark?
Thanks, Chris. really useful again, and lots of positive comments in there.
I can't hear you, Mark.
You can't hear me? Oh. Any better? Can you hear me now? No, still got a problem.
Does anyone have any questions? And Mark, I don't know if I can hear you or not.
I don't know. I'm trying.
I understand UPS, well, Amazon makes each of these books to order. They print them to order. So I apologize that it does take a little time before you get them, a few days. Actually, it seems to be about a week or even longer sometimes, depending on where you're located. Oh, has anything ever followed me home? Absolutely. I am not trying to say that the paranormal can't be dangerous. It can. I have had the gas turn on my stove 3 nights in a row without the flame coming on. And then one time I was going to break a curse in Philadelphia and the car wouldn't start. And then after I broke the curse, as I was getting on the highway, the brakes went out on the car and we smashed into the car in front of us, messing up my knees. I have been in a bed in Tewksbury, Massachusetts that flew across the room, smashed down and broke into pieces. In the Smurl house in West Pittston, Pennsylvania, that's the Conjuring Last Rites movie. I was the first investigator there, even before my grandparents. My grandfather sent me there to figure out what was going on. And I was levitated over the stairs there. So yes, I've had to perform cleansing ceremonies in my own home, both a spiritual bath and a house cleansing as well. And those instructions are also in the book.
Chris, I don't know if you can hear me now, but other people can hear me, so I'll keep going. But we have a few more questions.
It's fascinating to me. We can shape our local reality. We really can. We are capable of so much. That's, for me, the empowering thing about the paranormal. That's what's so amazing to me. When we let go of our fear, what are we really capable of? You know, Tibetan monks have been studied. And then there are, what are they called? Not gurus, not sadhus. The name escapes me at the moment, but Indian holy men who are capable of extraordinary feats. There are also people, I don't know if anybody remembers, maybe I'm just a nerd, but Stan Lee used to have a TV show about people who exhibited what we would call superhuman abilities, like a man who could channel electricity through his body, or another man who could climb like a monkey. When we accept our limitations, the ones that people put on us, the ones we put on ourselves, then we live to those limitations. It's the people who refuse limitations that change the world. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I think this is a good one about the book and people reading it.
I'm very happy to hear that. And please leave a review. That would be very helpful. Wow, that was fast. I guess I'll have to write a longer book next time. Actually, Mark and I are working on a series of books which will examine cases of both my grandparents and everybody from the Warren Legacy Foundation over the years with a more modern perspective and looking at things differently. Because one thing my grandparents taught me was to be open to changing your viewpoint. They were not dogmatists. When they started out, they didn't believe in demons at all. And when they were faced with things they couldn't understand, Yeah, they fell back on the framework that they had, which is perfectly natural. But they also taught me to continue and to learn from them. I'm only where I am today because I stood on the shoulders of giants. Yes, that makes perfect sense. But the questions are still there. Are you manipulating your environment? That's possible. Is it a spirit? That's also very possible. Remember, spirits are energy. Energy manipulation is the simplest thing they can do. And what fascinates me, there may be a gentleman here from Sweden who's listening to us right now. He's using an amazing device to communicate with spirits. And what I find fascinating is how spirits can adapt to technology. You know, we used to get the phantom phone calls from the dead back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And then they were leaving messages on answering machines. And then even leaving text messages from defunct phone numbers. I had a woman in Mexico City. First, she was getting messages from her mother who had passed away, warning her that her brother was in danger and she needed to protect him. And then when he inevitably died, when he was killed, he sent a message, one of love. It's just, it blows my mind that these spirits somehow, they're not, I don't think they understand the mechanisms, but they learn to manipulate the modulation of their message through whatever medium they're using. And that fascinates me. I don't have all the answers. I wish I did. Oh, yes. Yeah, I understand that as well. Hospitals are very, very haunted. People die there tragically. And you don't haunt someplace because you died there normally. But if you die traumatically, you can be stuck in a moment, reliving it over and over again. So that can be a reason for a haunting in that location. Okay, yes, I agree with that. Children are far more open, and we shouldn't suppress those abilities. On the other hand, though, we have to make it clear to them that that bump in the night isn't the devil. It's probably your grandmother come to check on you and make sure you're safe, and that they're letting you know they love you. As a matter of fact, when my son was afraid of the dark as a child, it's a bit of a long story, but we were visited, my grandparents and I, by a spirit named Harry Price. He had been a famous ghost hunter in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And he was British. My grandparents didn't have mentors, but they looked up to him, especially my grandfather. And Harry Price came to visit us while we were in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And he said he'd watch over me for the rest of my life, that he saw something in me, that I was going to shape the way that the paranormal was investigated in the future. I'd never believed that until recently. But I did tell my grandfather that I told my son that we had a family ghost named Harry who would always protect him. And that made my son feel very good. But animals, I want to caution you about them because, yes, animals have extraordinary senses. They can smell AIDS and cancer and all sorts of things. But they're also vulnerable to emotional contagion. Yes, they can sense spirits, but if you're anxious or afraid, they will start hunting for the source of your anxiety because they're feeling it too. So don't just jump to the conclusion that because your dog or cat is now looking around for something or even staring at one point in a wall, it doesn't mean that's a spirit. It could just be bugs in the wall, or it could be because they're reacting to you.
Chris, I'm just wondering, how are you doing for time? There's a few more questions, but how are you doing for time?
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, Chris can't hear me. Um,
Yeah, I understand that. My grandmother is an angel. She still is. She was in life and she is today. And my grandfather, he was a practical joker and he liked to scare people. Matter of fact, the basement was his Halloween room. And I remember being 3, 4 years old, walking down those narrow little stairs and having rubber bats fall on my head. And my grandfather thought it was the funniest thing on earth. So, yeah, scared the crap out of me. I'm fine. As long as everybody is happy, I can answer more questions or we can sign off for the evening. I don't want to leave anybody hanging. Oh, yes, my grandmother in particular has visited more, but my grandfather has visited, well, he used to visit a lot before she died. And then right after she died, he was with her in the house because I was living with them. And they would come up to the in-law apartment where I was living, and I would hear them come into the living room and walk around. They were just checking on me. They appeared together in Costa Rica when I was there, helping me to cross over a little child. They appeared during an interview in Lima, Peru, which I thought was funny because I had just been talking about how they both appeared at a Christmas party in Scotland while I was talking about them. And the interviewer asked me, "Are your grandparents with you now?" And I said, "No, not now." And all of a sudden, I felt this warm hug from behind, and there was this medium right next to me, a beautiful young woman, and she just looked at me like because she could see them behind me. I said, "No, sorry, yeah, they're here." But the last 3 years, my grandfather hasn't shown up even once. I think maybe he's moved on. My grandmother, on the other hand, has not. Oh, now that's a hard question, really. Um, the most spiritually attacked. It's the quality of the haunting or the manifestation and how it shows itself that changes throughout the world. In a lot of the world, black magic is a very real thing. I didn't want to believe in it. I still don't like the term. I like to think of it as directed energy. But I've been the victim of it. My grandparents were victims of it. Matter of fact, when I was being attacked by two magic users, I didn't want to believe it. I was just saying, oh no, even though I was electrocuted and I've got these giant bruises all over my body, things happen. Whatever this is, it'll go away. My grandmother showed up to 4 different psychics on the same night and told them to warn me that I was under attack and I needed to take care of it. I was asked by that same archbishop in Bogota that I mentioned earlier, why is it that these over the top poltergeist cases and demonic manifestations, as they are often labeled, happen in the United States and in Europe and places like that more than they do in South America or Africa or Asia. And my theory is because South America, Africa, and Asia direct the energy. They use magic. It's part of their cultural traditions. So when it's out of control, then you get something over the top like what we see in the West. But I couldn't say for sure where I've seen the worst. Okay. I had started questioning everything when I was about 12. I mean, I'd grown up with my grandparents. I, of course, knew everything as it was happening. when the Lindley Street case in Bridgeport happened, I was born in Bridgeport. I was only, 8 years old, 9 years old. But it was in the news and it was hard to miss. That shaped me. And I was looking at different religions when I was 12 years old. I was going with Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and Zen Buddhism, and that just continued throughout my life. I didn't set out to want to study the paranormal, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not a fan of the idea of the paranormal today. I do this because there's a need, and I want to help people. I'm concerned about the way things are portrayed in the media and the way people are often exploited by fear. And when you're watching reality TV shows, you need to take those with a grain of salt. And when you watch movies, please don't believe in them. There have been 4 movies made about cases I was involved in. None of them are accurate whatsoever. The cases are real, but the details are not. Hollywood isn't there to educate, it's there to entertain. Thank you. Well, actually, I'll be honest with you, Mark is the better writer by far. And he's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting on these. We'll investigate the cases together. I will shape my ideas, and then he will put it into his beautiful prose.
Okay, so everybody
And he's not talking for some reason, so I'm just going to ask him to turn on his microphone.
I am Chris.
By the way, I am going to be in England and Ireland and Scotland come September, October. Hopefully Sweden as well. So if any of the folks listening here are in the area, I'd love to meet you when I get there. I don't know what you think is just me, but that's okay.
Yeah. Everyone else can hear you.
Anyway.
Just two more
folks,
questions.
Thank you very much for tonight, and thank you for spending time with us. If you have any question, here we go. No. Once the rights to a story are signed over to Hollywood, they don't have any say in it whatsoever. My grandfather was dead before the movies came out. He was only around for that one TV movie, The Haunted, which came out in 91 or 92. And by the way, you can watch it on YouTube, at least the last time I checked. That's the Smurl case. And it's not a very good movie, but it's a hell of a lot more accurate than Conjuring Last Rites. Here's the thing I want to explain. Death gives meaning to life. Think about it this way. If you lived forever, and if everybody around you lived forever, you wouldn't have to have any empathy or compassion for them. Regardless of what state they're in now, they're going to be fine 1,000 years from now or 1,000,000 years from now. Why worry about them? They'll pick themselves up eventually. They'll fall down again eventually. But death gives immediacy to life. It gives us a reason to care and to make sure that people know that we care, that know that we love them. But if people could constantly come back, then it would also cheapen that lesson. Yes, I've been extraordinarily lucky in my life. I've seen death as a revolving door. My fiancée came back after she died, but only twice, and it certainly wasn't enough. Anybody who's lost somebody and been visited will tell you it's not enough. But it's still a gift. I don't know if they sometimes don't want to be back or they're afraid to frighten someone. I had one case and I've mentioned this a number of times, but I was just arrived in Costa Rica, and a woman had gotten a hold of me because her mother was dying of cancer and was afraid and wanted me to talk to her. But my Spanish wasn't very good at that time. It's not much better today. But I finally found a translator and sent a message saying I would be happy to talk to her the next day. But that night at 2 o'clock in the morning, my TV turned on by itself. I had a Apple Fire Sticks in the Amazon Fire Stick, whatever it was called, in the TV. So it was a smart TV. It turned on YouTube by itself, and it was playing a Spanish love song. I wasn't listening to Spanish music back then. And I had just been to a haunted sanitarium the day before, and I figured something had followed me home. I said, no, you're not bothering me tonight. Go away. And I turned off the TV and I went back to sleep. But about 2 hours later, I went and I looked at the history on YouTube, and it wasn't there. Whatever that song was, it wasn't in my history, and that's impossible. The next day, I got a message from the woman. Her mom had died the night before. And I realized that she had sent that message through me for her daughter. Because if she had turned on the TV at her daughter's house, it would have terrified her. They can find a way. If they need to get a hold of you, they'll find a way. Anyway, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night. God bless you all. And if you have any questions later, anything else, please let me know. And at the very least, please go to chrismckinnell.com and check out the academic paper. I think you'll find it fascinating. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.